I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook, and we are finishing The Stand, which has become amazing. So I'm going to move my water there. And then we'll start Tommy Knockers. I need to let y'all know next Friday through Sunday, Friday at 7 to Sunday at 7, I will not be reading. I will be spending time with my grandkids. So just so you know. Give me a second. I need to text my son. I asked him to do something he hasn't done yet. There's hubby. Oh, I didn't even have to write my hubby. Perfect. Got that done. Dogs need water, so I'm having my son fill up the bowl. It's kind of heavy for me, especially when we cleaned the yard. I didn't do a whole lot. Hi! I didn't do a whole lot myself, but my husband and my son did a lot. We filled up a dumpster, and then my son-in-law and his dad came up, and we finished that. So I've been very busy this weekend. But it's been well worth it because we are now done with the house and it's ready for sale. So we're good. Even got our stove and fridge. So we're excited. We're excited. Yeah. Oh, I'm not reading YouTube right. Okay. So, shall we begin? We left off with George hearing, and it cut off abruptly because it was like on an unstable thing or something. It was really annoying. So we left off with, from somewhere nearer, closing in, came the dark man's howling laughter. On Christmas Eve, they began to run a good traveling Stu and Tom that would last until almost New Year's Eve, or until the New Year. The surface of the snow had crusted up in the cold. The wind blew spattering clouds of ice crystals over it to pile up in the powdery herringbone dunes that the John Deere snowmobile cut through easily. They wore sunglasses to guard against snow blindness. They camped that Christmas Eve on the top of the crust 24 miles east of Avon, not far from Silverthorne. They were in the throat of Loveland Pass now, the choked and buried Eisenhower Tunnel, somewhere below and to the east of them. While they were waiting for dinner to warm up, Stu discovered an amazing thing, idly using an axe to chop through the crust, and his hand dug out the loose powder beneath. He discovered blue metal only an arm's length below where they sat. He almost called Tom's attention to his find, and then thought better of it. The thought that they were sitting less than 2 feet above a traffic jam, less than 2 feet above God, only know how many dead bodies, was an unsettling one. When Tom woke on the morning of the 25th, Christmas Day, at 7:15, he found Stu already up and cooking breakfast, which was something of an oddity. Tom was always up before Stu. There was a pot of Campbell's vegetable soup hanging over the fire, just coming to a simmer, though Jack was watching it with great enthusiasm. "Morning, Stu," Tom said, zipping his jacket and crawling out of his sleeping bag in his shelter half. He had to whiz something terrible. "Morning," Stu answered casually, "and a Merry Christmas." "Christmas!" Tom looked at him and forgot all about how badly he had to whiz. "Christmas?" he said again. "Christmas morning." He hooked a thumb to Tom's left. "Best I could do." Stuck into the snow crust was a spruce top about 2 feet high. It was decorated with a package of silver icicles Stu had found in the back room of the Avon 5 and Dime. "A tree?" Tom whispered, awed. "And presents? Those are presents, aren't they, Stu?" There were 3 packages on the snow under the tree, all of them wrapped in light blue tissue paper with silver wedding bells on it. There had been no Christmas paper at the 5 and Dime, not even in the back room. "They're presents, all right," Stu said. "For you. From Santa Claus, I guess." Tom looked indignantly at Stu. "Tom Collin knows there's no Santa Claus. Laws, no. They're from you." He began to look distressed. "And I never got you one thing. I forgot. I didn't know it was Christmas. I'm stupid. Stupid! He balled up his fists and struck himself in the center of his forehead. He was on the verge of tears. Stu squatted on the snow crust beside him. Tom, he said, you gave me my Christmas present early. No, sir, I never did. I forgot. Tom Collins, nothing but a dummy. M-O-O-N. That spells dummy. But you did, you know. The best one of all. Okay, the best of all. I'm still alive. I wouldn't be if it wasn't for you. Tom looked at him.
Do you see my message?
Not yet. I saw a YouTube link, but I haven't been able to look at it. I'm reading. Okay? I'll look at it when I'm done. Tom looked at him uncomprehendingly. If you hadn't come along when you did, I would have died in that washout west of Green River. And if it hadn't been for you, Tom, I would have died of pneumonia or the flu or whatever it was back there in the Utah hotel. I don't know how you picked the right pills, if it was Nick or God or just plain old luck, but you did it. You got no sense, calling yourself a dummy. If it hadn't been for you, I never would have seen this Christmas. I'm in your debt. Tom said, "Aw, that ain't the same." But he was glowing with pleasure. It is the same, Stu said seriously. Well, go on, open your presents, see what he brung you. I heard his sleigh in the middle of the night for sure. Guess the flu didn't get up to the North Pole. You heard him? Tom was looking at Stu carefully to see if he was being ribbed. Heard something. Tom took the first package and unwrapped it carefully. A pinball machine, encased in lucite. A new gadget all the kids had been yelling for the Christmas before, complete with 2-year coin batteries. Tom's eyes lit up when he saw it. Turn it on, Stu said. No, I want to see what else I got. There was a sweatshirt with a winded skier on it, resting on crooked skis and propping himself on his ski poles. It said, I climbed Loveless Pass. Stu told him, we haven't, but I guess we're getting there. Tom promptly stripped off his parka, put his sweatshirt on, and then replaced his parka. Great, Stu! The last package, the smallest, contained a simple silver medallion on a fine link silver chain. To Tom, it looked like a number 8 lying on its side. He held it up in puzzlement and wonder. What is it, Stu? It's a Greek symbol. I remember it from a long time ago on a doctor program called Ben Casey. It means infinity. Tom, forever. He reached across to Tom and held the hand that held the medallion. I think maybe we're going to get to Boulder, Tommy. I think we're meant to get there from the first. I'd like you to wear that, if you don't mind. And if you ever need a favor or wonder who to ask, you look at that and remember Stuart Redman, all right? Infinity, Tom said, turning it over in his hand. Forever. He slipped the medallion over his neck. I'll remember that, he said. Tom Collins is going to remember that. Shit, I almost forgot. Stu reached back into the shelter half and brought out another package. Merry Christmas, Kojak. Just let me open this for you. He took off the wrappings and produced a box of Heart's Mountain Dog Yummies. He scattered a handful on the snow, and Kojak gobbled them up quickly. He came back to Stu, wagging his tail hopefully. They will. Maybe later, Stu told him.
Mom, do you get my message?
I said I will read it when I'm done.
It's not reading.
Pocketing the box. And I will listen to it when I'm done. Okay?
Okay.
Make manners your watchword in everything you do, as old Bobby would say. No, well, yeah, I am, but I'm reading. He heard his voice grow hoarse and felt tears sting his eyes. He suddenly missed Glenn, missed Larry, missed Ralph. With his cocked back hat. Suddenly he missed them all. The ones who were gone, missed them terribly. Mother Abigail had said they would wade in blood before it was over. She was right. In his heart, Stu Redmond cursed her and blessed her at the same time. Stu, are you okay? Yeah, Tommy, I'm fine. He suddenly hugged Tom fiercely, and Tom hugged him back. Merry Christmas, old hoss. Tom said hesitantly. Can I sing a song before we go? Sure, if you want. Stu rather expected Jingle Bells or Frosty the Snowman sung in off-key and rather toneless voice of a child. But what came out was a fragment of The First Noel, sung in a surprisingly pleasant tenor voice. The First Noel, Tom's voice drifted across the white wastes, echoing back with faint sweetness. the angels did say, was to certain poor shepherds in the fields as they lay, in fields as they lay keeping their sheep, on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Stu joined in the chorus, his voice not as good as Tom's, but mixing well enough to suit the two of them, and the old sweet hymn drifted back and forth in the deep cathedral silence of Christmas morning. Noel, 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 Christ is born in Israel. That's the only part of it I can remember, Tom said a little guiltily as their voices drifted away. It was fine, Stu said. The tears were close again. It would not take them much to set him off, and that would upset Tom. He swallowed them back. We ought to get going. Daylight's wasting.
Did you put drops that?
Yes, I did. That's why she's upset. Sure. He looked at Stu. He was taking down his shelter half. It's the best Christmas I ever had, Stu. I'm glad, Tommy. And shortly after they were underway again, traveling east and upward under the bright, cold Christmas sun. They camped near the summit of Loveless Pass that night, nearly 1,200 feet above sea level. They slept three in a shelter as the temperature slipped down to 20 degrees below zero. The wind swept by endlessly, cold as the flat blade of a honed kitchen knife. And in the high shadows of the rocks, with the lunatic star sprawl of winter seeming to almost come close enough to touch, the wolves howled. The world seemed to be one gigantic crypt below them, both east and west. Early the next morning, before first light, Kojak woke them up with his barking. Stu crawled out to the front of the shelter half, his rifle in hand. For the first time, the wolves were visible. They had come down from their places and sat, in a rough ring around the camp. Not howling now, only looking. Their eyes held deep green glints, and they all seemed to grin heartlessly. Stu fixed 6 shots at random, scattering them. Put it in the mudroom, please. Scattering them. One of them leaped high and came down in a heap. Kojak trotted over to it, sniffed at it, then lifted his leg and urinated on it. The wolves are still his, Tom said. They always will be. Tom still seemed half asleep. His eyes were drugged and slow and dreamy. Stu suddenly realized what it was. Tom had fallen into that eerie state of hypnosis again. Tom, is he dead? Do you know? He never dies, Tom said. He's in the wolves, laws, yes, the crows, the rattlesnake, the shadow of the owl at midnight, and the scorpion at high noon. He roots upside down with the bats. He's blind like them. Will he be back? Stu asked urgently. He felt cold all over. Tom didn't answer. Tommy? Tom's sleeping. He went to see the elephant. Tom, can you see Boulder? Outside, a bitter white line of dawn was coming up in the sky against the jagged, sterile mountaintops. Yes. They're waiting for some word, waiting for spring. Everything in Boulder is quiet. Can you see Franny? Tom's face brightened. Franny, yes. She's fat. She's going to have a baby, I think. She stays with Lucy Swan. Lucy's going to have a baby, too. But Franny will have her baby first. Except... Tom's face grew dark. Tom, except what? The baby. What about the baby? Tom looked around uncertainly. We were shooting at wolves, weren't we? Did I fall asleep, Stu? Stu forced a smile. A little bit, Tom. I had a dream about an elephant. Funny, huh? Yeah. What about the baby? What about Fran? He began to suspect they weren't going to be in time, that whatever Tom had seen would happen before they could arrive. The good weather broke 3 days before the New Year, and they stopped in the town of Kittredge. They were close enough to Boulder now for the delay to be a bitter disappointment to them both. Even Kojak seemed uneasy and restless. Can we push on soon, Stu? Tom asked hopefully. I don't know, Stu said. I hope so. If we'd only gotten 2 more days of good weather, I believe that's all it would have taken. Damn, he sighed and then shrugged. Well, maybe it'll just be flurries, but it turned out to be the worst storm of the winter. It snowed for 5 days, piling up drifts that were 12 and even 14 feet high in places. when they dug themselves out on the 2nd of January to look at a sun as flat and small as a tarnished copper coin. All the landmarks were gone. Most of the town's small business district had not just been buried but entombed. Snowdrifts and snow dunes had been carved into wild, sinuous shapes by the wind. They meant to have on another planet. They might have been on another planet. I got the hiccups. Sorry. They went on, but the traveling was slower than ever, finding the road that had developed from a continuing nuisance into a serious problem. The snowmobile got stuck repeatedly, and they had to dig it out. And on the 2nd day of 1991, the freight train rumble of the avalanches began again. On the 4th of January, they came to a place where US 6 split off from the turnpike to go its way to Golden. And although neither of them knew it, there were no dreams or premonitions. That was the day that Franny Goldsmith went into labor. Okay, Stu said as they paused at the turnoff. No more trouble finding the road anyhow. It's been blasted through solid rock. We were damn lucky just to find the turnoff, though. Staying on the road was easy enough, but getting through the tunnels was not. To find the entrances, they had to dig through powdered snow, in some cases, and through packed remains of avalanches in others. The snowmobile roared, and clashed unhappily over the bare road inside. Worse, it was scary in the tunnels, as either Larry or the trash can man would have told them. They were black as mine pits, except for the cone of light thrown by the snowmobile's headlamp, because both ends were packed with snow. Being inside them was like being shut in a dark refrigerator. Going was painfully slow. Getting out of the far end of each tunnel was an exercise in engineering, and Stu was very much afraid that they would come upon a tunnel that was simply impassable, no matter how much they grunted and heaved and shuffled the cars stuck inside from one place to another. If that happened, they would have to turn around and go back to the interstate. They would lose a week at least. Abandoning the snowmobile was not an option. Doing that would be a painful way of committing suicide. And Boulder was maddeningly close. On January 7th, about 2 hours after they had dug their way out of another tunnel, Tom stood up on the back of the snowmobile and pointed. "What's that, Stu?" Stu was tired and grumpy and out of sorts. The dreams had stopped coming, but, perversely, that was somehow more frightening than having them. And, let me get this. This is the snowstorm that was drawn in. Okay? Don't stand up while we're moving, Tom. How many times do I have to tell you that? You'll fall over backward and go head first into the snow and... Yeah, but what is it? It looks like a bridge. Did we get on a river someplace, Stu? Stu looked, saw, throttled down, and stopped. What is it? Tom asked anxiously. Overpass, Stu muttered. I just don't believe it. Overpass? Stu turned around and grabbed Tom's shoulders. It's the Golden Overpass, Tom. That's 119 up there. Route 119, the Boulder Road. We're only 20 miles from town, maybe even less. Tom understood at last. His mouth fell open, and the comical expression on his face made Stu laugh out loud and clap him on the back. Not even the steady, dull ache in his leg could bother him now. Are we almost home, Stu? Yes. But then they were grabbing each other and dancing around in a clumsy circle, falling down, sending up puffs of snow, powdering themselves with the stuff. Kojak looked on amazed, but after a few moments he began to jump around with them, barking and wagging his tail. They camped that night in Golden and passed on up 119 toward Boulder early the next morning. Neither of them had slept very well the night before. Stu had never felt such anticipation in his life, and mixed with it was his steady nagging worry about Franny and the baby. About an hour after noon, the snowmobile began to hitch and lug. Stu turned it off and got the spare gas can lashed to the side of Kojak's little cabin. Oh, Christ, he said, feeling its deadly lightness. What's the matter, Stu? Me. I'm the matter. I knew that freaking can was empty and I forgot to fill it. Too damn excited, I guess. How's that for stupid? We're out of gas? Stu flung the empty can away. We sure got are. How could I be that stupid? Thinking about Franny, I guess. What do we do now, Stu? We walk or try to. You'll want your sleeping bag. We'll split this canned stuff, put it in the sleeping bags. We'll leave the shelters behind. I'm sorry, Tom. My fault all the way. That's all right, Stu. What about the shelters? Guess we better leave 'em, old hoss. They didn't get to Boulder that day. Instead, they camped at dusk, exhausted from wading through the powdery snow, which seemed so light and had slowed them to a literal crawl. There was no fire that night. There was no wood handy, and they were all three too exhausted to dig for it. They were surrounded by high rolling snow dunes. Even after dark, there was no glow on the northern horizon, although Stu looked anxiously for it. They ate a cold supper, and Tom disappeared into his sleeping bag and fell instantly asleep without even saying good night. Stu was tired, but his bad leg ached abominably. Be lucky if I haven't racked it up for good, he thought. But they would be in Boulder tomorrow night, sleeping in real beds. That was a promise. An unsettling thought occurred as he crawled in his sleeping bag. They would be in Boulder, and Boulder would be empty as Grand Junction had been, and Avon and Kittredge. Empty houses, empty stores. Buildings with their roofs crashed in from the weight of the snow. Streets filled in with drifts. No sound but the drip of melting snow and one of the periodic thaws. He had read at the library that it was not unheard of for the temperature in Boulder to shoot suddenly up to 70 degrees in the heat of winter. But everyone would be gone, like people in a dream, when you woke up, because no one was left in the world but Stu, Redmond, and Tom Collin. It was a crazy thought, but he couldn't shake it. He crawled out of his sleeping bag and looked north again, hoping for that faint lighting at the horizon that you can see when there is a community of people not too far distant in that direction. Surely he would be able to see something. He tried to remember how many people Glenn had guessed would be in the free zone by the time the snow closed down travel. He couldn't pull the figure out. 8,000? Had that been it? 8,000 people wasn't many. They wouldn't make much of a glow, even if all the juice was back on. Maybe you ought to get yourself some sleep and forget all that nutty stuff. Let tomorrow take care of tomorrow. He lay down, and after a few minutes of tossing and turning, brute exhaustion had its way. He slept and dreamed he was in Boulder, summer Boulder, where all the lawns were yellow and dead from the heat and lack of water. The only sound was an unlatched door banging back and forth in the light breeze. They had all left. Even Tom was gone. "Franny!" he called, and his only answer was the wind and the sound of the door banging slowly back and forth. By 2 o'clock the next day, they had struggled along another few miles. They took turns breaking trail. Stu was beginning to believe that they would be on the road yet another day. He was the one that was slowing them down. His leg was beginning to seize up. Be crawling pretty soon, he thought. Tom had been doing most of the trail breaking. When they paused for their cold canned lunch, it occurred to Stu that he had never even seen Franny when she was really big. Might have that chance yet, but he didn't think he would. He had become more and more convinced that it had happened without him, for better or for worse. Now, an hour after they had finished lunch, he was still so full of his own thoughts that he almost walked into Tom, who had stopped. "What's the problem?" he asked, rubbing his leg. "The road," Tom said, and Stu came around to look in a hurry. After a long, wondering pause, Stu said, "I'll be dipped in pitch." They were standing atop a snowbank nearly 9 feet high. Crusted snow sloped steeply down to a bare road below. And to the right was a sign which read simply, "Boulder City Limits." Stu began to laugh. He sat down on the snow and roared, his face turned up to the sky, oblivious of Tom's puzzled look. At last he
I'm just
said,
going
"They
upstairs,
plowed
okay?
the roads, you see?
I'm
We
just,
made it, Tom."
I'm just going upstairs.
Go ahead, honey. "We made it, Kojak. Come here." Stu spread the rest of the dog yummies on top of the snowbank, and Kojak gobbled them while Stu smoked and Tom looked at the road that had appeared out of the miles of unmarked snow like a lunatic's mirage. "We're in Boulder again," Tom murmured softly. "We really are. City limits. Citylimits. That spells Boulder. Laws, yes." Stu clapped him on the shoulder and tossed his cigarette away. "Come on, Tom. Let's get our bad selves home." Around 4, it began to snow again, and by 6 it was dark, and the black tar of the road had become a ghostly white under their feet. Stu was limping badly now, almost lurching along. Tom asked him once if he wanted to rest, and Stu only shook his head. By 8, 6 hours. Must be a long Boulder. By 8, the snow had become thick and driving. Once or twice they lost their direction and blundered into the snowbanks beside the road before getting themselves reoriented. The going underfoot became slick. Tom fell twice, and then, around 8:15, Stu fell on his bad leg. He had to clench his teeth against a groan. Tom rushed to help him get up. "I'm okay," Stu said, and managed to gain his feet. It was 20 minutes later when a young, nervous voice quavered out of the dark, freezing them to a spot. Who goes there? Who goes there?" Kojak began to growl, his fur bushing up into hackles. Tom gasped, and just audible below the steady shriek of the wind, Stu heard a sound that caused terror to race through him. A snick of a rifle bolt being levered back. Sentries. They've posted sentries. Be funny to come all this way and get shot by a sentry outside the Table Mesa shopping center. Real funny. That's one even Randall Flagg could appreciate. "Stu Redman!" he yelled into the dark. "It's Stu Redman here." He swallowed and heard an audible click in his throat. "Who's that over there?" "Stupid, won't be anyone that you know." But the voice that drifted out of the snow did sound familiar. "Stu Redman? Tom Collins with me. For Christ's sake, don't shoot us." "Is it a trick?" The voice seemed to be deliberating with itself. "No trick," Tom, say something. "Hi there," Tom said obediently. There was a pause. Yes, the voice was familiar. Called, "Stu had a picture on the wall in the old apartment. What was it?" Stu racked his brain frantically. The sound of the dawn rifle bolt kept recurring, getting in the way. He thought, "My God, I'm standing here in a blizzard trying to think of what picture was on the wall in the apartment." "The old apartment," he said. "Fran must have moved in with Lucy. Lucy used to make fun of that picture. Used to say that John Wayne was waiting for those Indians just where you couldn't see 'em. Frederick Remington," he bellowed at the top of his lungs. "It's called the Warpath." "Stu!" the sentry yelled back. A black shape materialized out of the snow, slipping and sliding as it ran toward them. "I just can't believe it." Then he was in front of them, and Stu saw it was Billy Geringer, who had caused them so much trouble with his hot rotting last summer. "Stu, Tom, and Kojak, by Christ! Where's Glenn Bateman and Larry? Where's Ralph?" Stu shook his head slowly. I don't know. We're freezing." "Sure, the supermarket's right up the road." "I'll call Norm Kellogg, Harry Dunbarton, Dick Ellis. Shit, I'll call the town. This is great. I can't believe it. Billy." Billy turned back to them, and Stu limped over to where he stood. "Billy, Fran was going to have a baby." Billy grew very still, and then he whispered, "Oh, shit, I forgot about that. She had it. George Richardson can tell you, Stu. Or Dan Lathrop. He's the new doc. We got him about 4 weeks after you guys left. Used to be a nose, throat, and ears man, but he's pretty good." Stu gave Billy a brisk shake, cutting off his almost frantic babble. "What's wrong?" Tom asked. "Is there something wrong with Franny?" "Talk to me, Billy," Stu said. "Please." "Fran's okay," Billy said. "She's going to be fine." "That's what you heard?" "No, I saw her. Me and Tony Donahue. We went up together with some flowers from the greenhouse. The greenhouse is Tony's project. He's got all kinds of stuff growing there, not just flowers. The only reason she's still in is because she had to have what do you call it, a Roman birth? A cesarean section. Yeah, right. because the baby came the wrong way. But no sweat. We went to see her 3 days after she had the baby. It was January 7th. We went up 2 days ago. We brought her some roses. We figured she could use some cheering up because the baby died? Stu asked dully. It's not dead, Billy said. Then he added with great reluctance, not yet. Stu suddenly felt far away, rushing through the void. He heard laughter and the howling of wolves. Billy said in a miserable rush, It's got the flu. It's got Captain Trips. It's the end for all of us, that's what people are saying. Granny had him on the 4th, a boy, 6 pounds 9 ounces, and at first he was okay. I guess everybody in the zone got drunk. Dick Ellis said it was like VE Day and VJ Day, all rolled into one. And then on the 6th, he just got it. Yeah, man, Billy said, and his voice began to hitch and thicken. He got it. Aw, shit, ain't that some welcome home? I'm so fucking sorry, Stu. Stu reached out, found Billy's shoulder, and pulled him closer. At first, everybody was saying he might get better. Maybe it's just the ordinary flu or bronchitis, maybe the croup. But the docs, they said newborn babies almost never get those things. It's like the natural immunity because they're so little. But both George and Dan, they saw so much of the super flu last year that it would be hard for them to make a mistake. Stu finished for him. Yeah, Billy whispered. You got it. What a bitch, Stu muttered. He turned away from Billy and began to limp down the road. Stu, where are you going? To the hospital, Stu said, to see my woman. Chapter 76. You're busy cooking up something extra special. Why do people do this? Ugh, I'm ignoring it. Fran lay awake with the reading lamp on. It cast a pool of bright light to the left side of the clean white sheet that covered her. In the center of the light, face down, was an Agatha Christie. She was awake, but slowly drifting off, in the state where memories clarify magically as they begin to transmute themselves into dreams. She was going to bury her father. What happened after that didn't matter. She was going to drag herself out of the shock wave enough to get that done. The act of love. When that was done, she could cut herself a piece of strawberry rhubarb pie. It would be large, it would be juicy, and it would be very, very bitter. Marcy had been in half an hour ago to check on her. Fran asked her, Is Peter dead yet? And even as she spoke, time seemed to double so that she wasn't sure if she meant Peter the baby or Peter the baby's father, now deceased. Shh, he's fine, Marcy had said. But Franny had seen a more truthful answer in Marcy's eyes. The baby she had made with Jess Ryder was engaged in dying somewhere behind 4 glass walls. Perhaps Lucy's baby would have better luck. Both of its parents had been immune to Captain Trips. The zone had written off her Peter now and had pinned its collective hopes on those women who had conceived after July 1st of last year. It was brutal, completely understandable. Her mind drifted, cruising at some low level along the border of sleep, coning a terrain of her past and the landscape of her heart. She thought about her mother's parlor, where seasons passed in a dry age. She thought about Stu's eyes, about the first sight of her baby, Peter Goldsmith Redmond. She dreamed that Stu was with her in her room. Fran, nothing had worked out the way it should have. All the hopes had turned out to be a phony, as false as those audio animatronic animals that did at Disney World. But a bunch of clockwork, cheat, a false dawn, a false pregnancy. Hey, Franny. In her dream, she saw that Stu had come back. He was standing in the doorway of her room, wearing a gigantic fur parka. Another cheat. But she saw that the dreams. Stu had a beard. Wasn't that funny? She began to wonder if it was a dream. She saw Tom Collins standing behind him. And was that Kojak sitting at Stu's heel? Her head flew suddenly up to her cheek. Her hand flew suddenly up to her cheek and pinched viciously, making her left eye water. Nothing changed. Stu, she whispered. Oh my God, is it Stu? Her face was deeply tanned except for the skin around her eyes, which might have been covered by sunglasses. That was not a detail you would expect to notice in a dream. Oh, his face, excuse me. His face was deeply tanned. She pinched herself again. It's me, Stu said, coming into the room. Stop working yourself over, honey. His limp was so severe he was nearly stumbling. Franny, I'm home. Stu, she cried, are you real? If you're real, come here. He went to her then and held her. Chapter 77. Stu was sitting in a chair, drawn up to Franny's bed, with George Richardson and Dan Lathrop. When George Richardson and Dan Lathrop came in, Fran immediately seized Stu's hand and squeezed it tightly, almost painfully. Her face was set in rigid lines, and for a moment, Stu saw what she would look like when she was old. For a moment, she looked like Mother Abigail. Stu, George said, I heard about your return. Miraculous. Can't tell you how glad I am to see you. We all are. George shook his hand, then introduced Dan Lathrop. Dan said, we heard there was an explosion in Las Vegas. You actually saw it? Yes. People around here seem to think it was a nuclear blast. Is that true? Yes. George nodded at this, then seemed to dismiss it and turned to Fran. How are you feeling? All right. Glad to have my man back. What about the baby? Actually, Lathrop said, that's what we're here about. Franny nodded. Dead? George and Dan exchanged a glance. Franny, I want you to listen carefully and try not to misunderstand anything I say. Lightly, with suppressed hysteria, Fran said, if he's dead, just tell me. Fran, Stu said. Peter seems to be recovering, Dan Lathrop said mildly. There was a moment of utter shocked silence in the room. Fran, her face pale, an oval below the dark chestnut mass of her hair, on the pillow, looked up at Dan as if he had suddenly begun to sprout some sort of lunatic doggerel. Please, I'm going to let you out of there, but then you got to stop barking because I'm trying to read. Your bark is overpowering it, so stop that. Okay? Oh, it didn't open? Really needs a bottom too? Here you go, baby. Now, let me read. Whew, I'm going to end up crying, y'all. Looked up at Dan as if he had suddenly begun to sprout some sort of lunatic doggerel. Someone, either Lord Constable or Marcy Spruce, looked into the room and then passed on. It was a moment that Stu never forgot. What? Fran whispered at last. George said. You mustn't get your hopes up. You said recovering? Fran said. Her face was flatly stunned. Until this moment, she hadn't realized how much she had resigned herself to the baby's death. George said, both Dan and I saw thousands of cases during the epidemic, Fran. You noticed I don't say treated, because I don't think either of us ever changed the course of the disease by a jot or a tittle in any patient. Fair statement, Dan? Yes. The I want line that Stu had first noticed in New Hampshire hours after meeting her now appeared on Fran's forehead. Will you get to the point, for heaven's sake? I'm trying. But I have to be careful, and I'm going to be careful, George said. This is your son's life we're discussing, and I'm not going to let you press me. I want you to understand the drift of our thinking. Captain Tripp's was a shifting antigen flu, we think now. Now, every kind of flu, the old flu, had a different antigen. That's why it kept coming back every 2 or 3 years or so in spite of the flu vaccinations. There would be an outbreak of A-type flu, Hong Kong flu that was, and you'd get a vaccine for it, and then 2 years later the type B strain would come along and you'd get sick unless you got a different vaccination. But you'd get well again, Dan broke in, because eventually your body would produce its own antibodies. Antibodies. Your body changed to cope with the flu. Captain Tripp's, the flu itself, changed every time your body came to a defense posture. In that way, it was more similar to the AIDS virus than to the common sorts of flu our bodies have been used to. And, as with AIDS, it just went on shifting from form to form until the body was worn out. The result, inevitably, was death. Then why didn't we get it? Stu asked. George said. We don't know. I don't think we're ever going to know. The only thing we can be sure about is that the immunes didn't get sick and then throw the sickness off. They never got sick at all, which brings me to Peter again. Dan? Yes. The key to Captain Trips is that people seem to get almost better, but never completely better. Now this baby, Peter, got sick 48 hours after he was born. There was no doubt about all that. It was Captain Trips. The symptoms were classic. But those discolorations under the line of the jaw, which both George and I had come to associate with the fourth and terminal stage of superflu, they never came. On the other hand, his periods of remission have been getting longer and longer. I don't understand, Fran said, bewildered. What? Every time the flu shifts, Peter is shifting right back at it, George said. There's still the technical possibility that he might relapse, but he has never entered the final critical phase. He seems to be wearing it out. There was a moment of total silence, and Dan said, You've passed on half an immunity to your child, Fran. He got it, but we think now he's got the ability to lick it. We theorized that Mrs. Wentworth's twins had the same chance, but with the odds stacked much more rapidly against them. And I still think that they might have died of the superflu, but the complications arising from the superflu. Oh, but I still think they may not have died of the superflu, but of complications rising from the superflu. It's a very small distinction, I know, but it may be crucial. And the other woman who got pregnant by men who weren't immune, Stu asked. We think they'll have to watch their babies go through the same painful struggle, George said. Some of the children may die. It was touch and go with Peter for a while, and maybe again, for all we know now. But very shortly, we're going to reach the point where all the fetuses of the free zone in the world are the product of two immune parents. And while it wouldn't be fair to pre-guess, I'd be willing to lay money that when that happens, it's going to be our ball game. In the meantime, we're going to be watching Peter very closely, and we won't be watching him alone, if that's any added consolation, Dan added. In a very real sense, Peter belongs to the entire free zone right now, Rennie whispered. I only want him to live because he's mine, and I love him, she looked at Stu, and he's my link with the old world. He looks more like Jess than me, and I'm glad. That seems right. Do you understand, love? Stu nodded, and a strange thought occurred to him. How much he would like to sit down with Hap and Norm Brewitt and Vic Palfrey and have a beer with them and watch Vic make one of his shitty-smelling home-rolled cigarettes, and then tell them how all of this had come out. They had always called him Silent Stu. Old Stu, they said, wouldn't say shit if he had a mouthful. But he would talk their ears off their heads. He would talk all night and all day. He grasped Fran's hand blindly, feeling the sting of tears. We've got rounds to make, George said, getting up. But we'll be monitoring Peter closely, Fran. You'll know for sure when we know for sure. When can I nurse him if he doesn't? A week, Dan said. But that's so long. It's going to be long for all of us. We've got 61 pregnant women in the zone, and 9 of them conceived before the superflu. It's going to be especially long for them. Stu, it's good meeting you. Dan held his hand and Stu shook it. He left quietly, a man with a necessary job to do and anxious to do it. George shook Stu's hand and said, I'll see you by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. Just tell Lori when would be the most convenient time for you. Before the leg, George said. It's bad, isn't it? Not too bad. Stu, Fran said, sitting up. What's wrong with your leg? Broken, badly set, overtaxed, George said. Nasty, but it can be fixed. Well, Stu said. Well, nothing! Let me see it, Stuart. The I want line was back. Later, Stu said. George got up. See Lori, all right? He will, Fran said. Stu grinned. I will. Boss lady says so. It's very good to have you back, George said. 1,000 questions seemed to stopped just behind his lips. He shook his hand slightly and then left, closing the door firmly behind him. "Let me see you walk," Franny said. The I want line still seized her brow. "Hey, Franny. Come on, let me see you walk." He walked for her. It was a little like watching a sailor make his way across the pitching foredeck. When he turned back to her, she was crying. "Oh, Franny, don't do that, honey." "I have to," she said, and put her hands over her face. He sat beside her and took her hands away. "No, no, you don't." She looked at him nakedly, her tears still flowing. So many people dead. Harold, Nick, Susan. And what about Larry? What about Glenn and Ralph? I don't know. And what's Lucy going to say? She'll be here in an hour. She comes every day. And she's 4 months pregnant herself, Stu. Stu, when she asks you, they died over there, Stu said, speaking more to himself than to her. That's what I think. What I know in my heart. Don't say it that way, Fran begged. Not when Lucy gets here. It'll break her heart if you do. I think they were the sacrifice. God always asks for a sacrifice. His hands were bloody with it. Why? I can't say. I'm not a very smart man. Perhaps we brought it on ourselves. All I know for sure is that the bomb went off over there instead of over here, and we're safe for a while. For a little while. For a little while. Is Flagg gone? Really gone? I don't know. I think we'll have to stand a watch for him. And in time, someone will have to find the place where they made the germs like Captain Tripp's, and fill that place up with dirt, and seed the ground with salt, and then pray over it. Pray for all of us. Much later that evening, not long before midnight, Stu pushed her down the silent hospital corridor in a wheelchair. Laurie Constable walked with them, and Fran had seen to it that Stu had made his appointment. You look like you're the one that should be in the wheelchair, Stu Redmond, Laurie said. Right now it doesn't bother me at all, Stu said. They came to a large glass window that looked in on a room done in blues and pinks. A large mobile hung from the ceiling. Only one crib was occupied in the front row. Stu stared in, fascinated. Goldsmith, Redmond, Peter. The card on the front of the crib read, Boy, BW, I don't know what that, birth weight, BW, 6 pounds 9 ounces, M. Francis Goldsmith, room 209, F, that was the mother, F, father, Jesse Ryder, dead. Peter was crying. His small hands were balled into fists. His face was red. There was an amazing swatch of dark black hair on his head. His eyes were blue, and they seemed to look directly into Stu's eyes, as if accusing him of being the author of all his misery. His forehead was creased with a deep vertical slash, an I want line. Franny was crying again. Franny, what's wrong? All those empty cribs, she said, and her voice became a sob. That's what's wrong. He's all alone in there. No wonder he's crying. Stu, he's all alone. All those empty cribs, my God. He won't be alone for very long, Stu said, and put an arm around her shoulder. And he looks to me as if he's going to bear up just fine. Don't you think so, Laurie? But Laurie had left the two of them alone in front of the nursery window. Wincing at the pain in his leg, Stu knelt beside Franny and hugged her clumsily, and they looked in at Peter with mutual wonder, as if the child were the first that had ever been gotten upon the earth. After a bit, Peter fell asleep, both hands clenched together on his chest, and still they watched him, and wondered that he should be there at all. Chapter 78, May Day. They had finally put the winter behind them. It had been long, and to Stu, with his East Texas background, it had been fantastically hard. 2 days after his return to Boulder, his leg had been rebroken and reset, and this time encased in a heavy plaster cast that had not come off until early April. By then, the cast had begun to look like some incredibly complex road map. It seemed that everyone in the zone had autographed it, although that was a patent impossibility. The pilgrims had begun to trickle in again by the 1st of March, and by the day that had been the cutoff for income tax returns, April 15th, in the old world, the free zone was nearly 11,000 strong, according to Sandy DeChains, who now headed a census bureau of a dozen persons, a bureau that had its own computer terminal at the First Bank of Boulder. Now he and Fran stood with Lucy Swan in the picnic area half up Flagstaff Mountain and watched the May Day chase. All the zone's children appeared to be involved, and not a few of the adults. The original May basket, bedecked with crepe ribbons and filled with fruits and toys, had been hung on Tom Cullen. It had been Fran's idea. Tom had caught Bill Geringer, despite Billy's self-conscious disclaimer that he was too old for such kid games. He had joined with the will. And together they had caught the Upshaw boy, or was it Upson? Stu had trouble keeping them all straight, and the three of them had tracked down Leo Rockway, hiding behind Brentner Rock. Tom himself had put the tag on Leo. The chase ranged back and forth over West Boulder, gangs of kids and adolescents surging up and down the streets that were still mostly empty, Tom bellowing and carrying his basket, and at last it led back to here, where the sun was hot and the wind blew warm. The band of tagged children had come 200 strong, was some 200 strong, and they were still in the process of tracking down the last half dozen or so that were still out. In the process, they were scaring up dozens of deer that wanted no part of the game. 2 miles further up, they were scaring them. 2 miles farther up, at Sunrise Amphitheater, a huge picnic lunch had been spread where Harold Lauder had once waited for just the right moment to speak into his walkie-talkie. At noon, 2,000 or 3,000 people would sit down together and look east toward Denver and eat venison and deviled eggs and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and fresh pie for dessert. It might be the last mass gathering the zone would ever have, unless they all went down to Denver and got together in a stadium where the Broncos had once played football. Football. Now on May Day, the trickle of early spring had swelled to a flood of immigrants. Since April 15th, another 8,000 had come in, and they were now 19,000 or so, temporarily at least. Sandy's Census Bureau could not keep up. A day when only 500 came in was a rare day. In the playpen, which Sue had brought up and covered with a blanket, Peter began to cry lustily. Fran moved toward him, but Lucy, mountainous and 8 months pregnant, was there first. "I warn you," Fran said, "it's his diapers. I can tell just by the way he sounds. Looking at a little poo isn't going to cross my eyes." Lucy lifted an indignant, crying Peter from the playpen and shook him gently back and forth in the sunlight. "Ugh. Hi, baby, what are you doing? Not too much?" Peter blatted. Lucy set him down on another blanket they had brought up for a changing table. Peter began to crawl away, still bleeding. Lucy turned him over and began to unsnap his blue corduroy pants. Peter's legs waved in the air. "Why don't you two go for a walk?" Lucy said. She smiled at Fran. Stu thought the smile was sad. "Why don't we just do that?" Fran asked, and took Stu's arm. Stu allowed himself to be walked away. They crossed the road and entered a mild green pasture that climbed upward to a steep angle under the moving white cloths and bright blue sky. "What was that about?" Stu asked. "Pardon me?" But Fran looked like just a trifle too innocent. "That look. What look?" "I know a look when I see one," Stu said. "I may not know what it means, but I know when I see it. I know it when I see it. Sit down with me, Stu." "Like that, is it?" They sat down and looked east, where the land fell away in a series of swoops to flatlands that faded into a blue haze. Nebraska was out there somewhere, out there in that haze somewhere. I'm serious, and I don't know how to talk to you about it, Stuart. Well, you just go on the best you can, he said, and took her hand. Instead of speaking, Fran's face began to work. A tear spilled down her cheek, and her mouth drew down to trembling. Fran, no, I won't cry, she said angrily. And then there were more tears, and she cried in spite of herself, cried hard in spite of herself, bewildered. Stu put an arm around her and waited. When the worst seemed to be over, he said, now tell me, what's this about? I'm homesick, Stu. I want to go back to Maine. Behind them, the children whooped and yelled. Stu looked at her, utterly flabbergasted. Then he grinned a little uncertainly. That's it? I thought you must have decided to divorce me, at the very least. Not that we'd ever actually had the benefit of the clergy, as they say. I won't go any place without you, she said. She had taken a Kleenex from her breast pocket and was wiping her eyes with it. Don't you know that? I guess I do. But I want to go back to Maine. I dream about it. Don't you ever dream about East Texas, Stu? Arnett? No, he said thoughtfully. I could live just as long and die just as happy if I never saw Arnett again. Do you want to go to Ogunquit, Franny? Eventually, maybe, but not right away. I'd like to go to western Maine, where what they called the Lakes region. You were almost there when Harold and I met you in New Hampshire. There are some beautiful places, too. Brighton, Sweden, Castle Rock. Castle Rock, I know that one. That's part of a couple other books. Like everything that is written, if you notice, will surround Maine at some point. It's kind of neat. Like in the dome, part of it is Castle Rock. The lakes would be jumping with fish, I'd imagine. In time, we might settle on the coast, I suppose. But I couldn't face that first year. Too many memories. It would be. Oh, yeah, we're good. It would be too big at first. The sea would be too big. She looked down at her nervously plucking hands. If you want to stay here, help them get it going, I'll understand. Mountains are beautiful too, but it just doesn't seem like home. He looked east and discovered he could at last name something he had felt stirring around in himself since the snow had begun to melt, an urge to move on. There were too many people here. They weren't exactly stepping all over each other, at least not yet, but they were beginning to make him feel nervous. They were zoners, and so they had begun to call themselves, who could cope with that sort of thing, who actually seemed to relish it. Jack Jackson, who headed the new Free Zone Committee, now expanded to 9 members, was one. Brad Kitchener was another. Brad had 100 projects going, and all the warm bodies he could use to help with each of them. It had been his idea to get one of the Denver TV Denver TV stations going. It showed old movies every night from 6 to 1 a.m. with a 10-minute news break at 9 o'clock. And the man who had taken over the marshalling chore in Stu's absence, Hugh Petrella, was not the sort of man Stu much cottoned to. The very fact that Petrella had campaigned for the job made Stu feel uneasy. He was a hard, puritanical fellow with a face that looked as if it had been carved by licks of a hatchet. He had 17 deputies and was pushing for them for more at each Free Zone Committee meeting. If Glenn had been here, Stu thought he would have said that the endless American struggle began between the law and freedom of the individual had begun again. Petrella was not a bad man, but he was a hard man, and Stu supposed that with Hugh's self-belief that the law was the final answer to every problem, he made a better marshal than Stu himself ever would have been. I know you've been offered a spot on the committee, Fran was saying hesitantly. Oh, I got the feeling that was an honorary thing, didn't you? Fran looked relieved. Well, I got the idea they'd be just as happy if I turned it down. I'm the last holdover from the old committee, and we were a crisis committee. Now there's no crisis. What about Peter, Franny? I think he'll be old enough to travel by June, she said. And I'd like to wait until Lucy has her baby. There had been 18 births in the zone since Peter had come into the world on January 4th. 4 had died. The rest were just fine. The babies born with the plague-immune parents would begin to arrive very soon, and it was entirely possible that Lucy's would be the first. She was due on June 14th. What would you think about leaving on July 1st? He asked. Fran's face lit up. You will? You want to? Sure. You're not just saying that to please me. Nah, he said. Other people will be leaving too. Not many, not for a while, but some. She flung her arms around his neck and hugged him. Maybe it will just be a vacation, she said, or maybe we'll really like it. She looked at him timidly. Maybe we'll want to stay. He nodded, maybe so. But he wondered if either of them would be content to stay in one place for any run of years. He looked over at Lucy and Peter. Lucy was sitting on a blanket and bouncing Peter up and down. He was giggling and trying to catch Lucy's nose. Have you thought that he might get sick? And you? What if you catch pregnant again? She smiled. There are books. We can read them both. We can both read them. We can't live our lives afraid, can we? Well, no, I suppose not. Books and good drugs. We can learn to use them. And as far as the drugs that I've gone over, we can learn to make them again when it comes to getting sick and dying. She looked back toward the large meadow where the last of the children were walking toward the picnic area, sweaty and winded. That's going to happen here, too. Remember Ralph Moffat? She said, and Shirley Hammett? Yes. Shirley had died of a heart attack in February. Franny took his hands. Her eyes were bright and shining with determination. I say we take our chances and live our lives the way we want. All right, that sounds good to me. It sounds right. I love you, East Texas. That goes back to you, ma'am. Peter had begun to cry again. Let's go see what's wrong with the emperor, she said, getting up and brushing grass from her slacks. He tried to crawl and bumped his nose, Lucy said, handing Peter to Fran. Poor boy. Oh, poor boy, Fran agreed. Put Peter on her shoulder. His head laid familiarly against her neck, looked at Stu and smiled. Stu smiled back. Eek, baby, he said, and Peter laughed. Lucy looked from Fran to Stu and back to Fran again. You're going, aren't you? You talked him into it? I guess she did, Stu said. We'll stick around long enough to see which flavor you get, though. I'm glad, Lucy said. From far off a bell began to clang in strong musical notes, which seemed to beat themselves into the day. Lunch, Lucy said, getting up. She patted her gigantic belly. Hear that, Junior? We're going to eat. Hal, don't kick, I'm going. Stu and Fran got up too. Here, you take the boy, Fran said. Peter had gone to sleep. The three of them walked up the hill to Sunrise Amphitheater together. Dusk of a summer evening. They sat on the porch as the sun went down and watched Peter as he crawled enthusiastically through the dusk of the yard. Stu was in a chair with a caned seat. The caning had been belled downward by years of use. Sitting to his left was Fran in the rocker. In the yard, to Peter's left, the donut-shaped shadow of a tire swing printed its depthless image on the ground in the day's kind last light. She lived here a long time, didn't she? Fran asked softly. Long and long, Stu agreed and pointed at Peter. He's getting all dirty. Here's water. She had a hand pump. All it takes is priming. All the conveniences, Stuart. He nodded and said no more. He lit his pipe, taking long puffs. Peter turned around to make sure they were still there. Hi, baby, Stu said and waved. Peter fell over. He got back up on his hands and knees and began to creep around in a large circle again. Standing at the end of the dirt road that cut through the corn, was a small Winnebago camper with a winch attached to the front. They were sticking to secondary roads, but the winch had still come in handy again and again. Are you lonely? Fran asked. No, I may be in time. Scared about the baby? She patted her stomach, which was still perfectly flat. Nope. It's going to put a scab on Peter's nose. It'll fall off. And Lucy had twins. He smiled at the sky. Can you imagine it? I saw them. Seeing's believing, they say. What do you think we'll do in Maine, Stu? He shrugged. Near the end of July and plenty. Oh, when do you think we'll be in Maine? Near the end of July and plenty of time to start getting ready for winter. Anyhow, you worried? Nope, she said, mocking him. She stood up. Look at him. He's getting filthy. Told you. He watched her go down the porch steps and gather up the baby. He sat there, where Mother Abigail had sat often and long. Thought about the life that was ahead of them. He thought it would be all right. In time, they would have to go back to Boulder. If only so many children could meet others their own age and court and marry and make more children. Or perhaps part of Boulder would come to them. There had been people who had questioned their plans closely, almost cross-examining them, but the look in their eyes had been one of longing rather than contempt and anger. Sue and Fran weren't the only ones with a touch of the wanderlust, apparently. Harry Dunbarton, the former spectacles salesman, had talked about Minnesota, and Mark Zellman, had spoken of Hawaii of all places, learning how to fly a plane and going to Hawaii. Mark, you'd kill yourself, Fran said, had scolded indignantly. Mark had only smiled slyly and said, Look who's talking, Franny. And Stan Nagotny had begun to talk thoughtfully about going south, perhaps stopping at Acapulco for a few years, then maybe going on down to Peru. I'll tell you what, Stu, he said. All these people make me nervous as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. I don't know one person in a dozen anymore. People lock their houses at night. Don't look at me that way. It's a fact. Listening to me, you'd think I lived in Miami, which I had for 16 years, and locked the house every night. But damn, that was one habit I liked losing. Anyway, it's just getting too crowded. I think about Acapulco a lot. Now, if I could just convince Janie. It wouldn't be such a bad thing, Stu thought, watching Franny pump water, if the free zone did fall apart. Glenn Bateman would think so. That was for sure. Wait, let me make sure that was the word. Oh, he was quite sure. Its purpose had been served, Glenn would say. Best to disband before. Before what? Well, at the last Free Zone Committee meeting, before he and Fran had left, Hugh Petrella had asked for and had been given the authorization to arm his deputies. It had been the cause in Boulder during his and Fran's few weeks there. Everyone had taken a side. In early June, a drunk had manhandled one of the deputies and had thrown him through a glass plate window of the Broken Drum, a bar on Pearl Street. The deputy had needed over 30 stitches and a blood transfusion. Petrella had argued it never would have happened if the man had had a police special to point at the drunk. And so the controversy raged. There were plenty of people, and Stu was among them, although he kept his opinion mostly to himself, who believed that, if the deputy had had a gun, the incident might have ended with a dead drunk instead of a wounded deputy. What happens after you give the guns to the deputies? He asked himself. What's the logical progression? And it seems that it was the scullery, slightly dry voice of Glenn Bateman that spoke the answer. You give them bigger guns and police cars when you discover a free zone community down in Chile or maybe up in Canada. You make Hugh Petrella the Minister of Defense just in case, and maybe start sending out search parties because after all, that stuff is lying around, just waiting to be picked up. Let's put him to bed, Fran said, going up the stairs. Okay. Why are you sitting around in such a blue study anyhow? Was I? You certainly were. He used his fingers to push the corners of his mouth up in a smile. Better? Much. Help me put him in. My pleasure. As he followed her inside Mother Abigail's house, he thought it would be better, much better, if they did break down and spread. Postpone organization as long as possible. It was organization that always seemed to cause the problem. When the cells began to clump together and grow dark, you didn't have to give the cops again. You didn't have to give the cops again until the cops couldn't remember the names, the faces. Fran lit a kerosene lamp, and it made a soft yellow glow. Peter looked at them quietly, already sleeping. He had played hard. Fran slipped him into a nightshirt. All any of us can buy is time, Stu thought. Peter's lifetime, his children's lifetimes, maybe the lifetimes of my great-grandchildren, until the year 2100, maybe. Surely no longer than that. Maybe not that long. Time enough for poor old Mother Earth to recycle herself a little. A season of rest. What? She asked, and he realized he had muttered it aloud. A season of rest, he repeated. What does that mean? Everything, he said. Took her hand. Looking down at Peter, he thought, maybe if we tell him what happened, he'll tell his own children, warn them. Dear children, the toys of death. They're flash burns and radiation sickness and black choking plague. These toys are dangerous. The devil in man's brains guided the hands of God when they were made. Don't play with these toys, dear children, please. Not ever. Not ever again. Please. Please learn the lesson. Let this empty world be your copybook. Franny, he said, and turned her around so he could look into her eyes. What, Stuart? Do you think people ever learn anything? She opened her mouth to speak, hesitated, fell silent. The kerosene lamp flickered. Her eyes seemed very blue. I don't know, she said at last. She seemed unpleased with her answer. She struggled to say something more, to illuminate her first response, and could only say it again. I don't know. The circle closes. We need help, the poet reckoned. Edward Dorn. He awoke at dawn. He had his boots on. He sat up and looked around himself. He was on a beach, as white as bone. Above him, a ceramic sky of cloudless blue stood tall and far. Beyond him, a turquoise sea broke far out upon a reef, and then came in gently, surging up in between strange boats that were canoes, outrigging canoes. He knew that, but how? He got to his feet and almost fell. He was shaky, bad off, felt hung over. He turned around. Green jungle seemed to leap out at his eyes. A dark forested tangle of vines and broad leaves and lush, blooming flowers that were pink as a chorus girl's nipple. He was bewildered again. What was a chorus girl? For that matter, what was a nipple? A macaw screamed at the sight of him, flew away blindly, crashed into a thick bole of an old banyan tree, and fell dead at the foot of it with its legs sticking up. Sat him on the table with his legs sticking up. A mongoose looked at his flushed, dear, scruffy face, and dead of a brain aneurysm. In comes Sis with a spoon and a glass. A beetle that had been trundling busily up the trunk of a nipa palm turned black and shriveled to a husk, with tiny blue bolts of electricity fizzing for a moment between its antennae. Starts dripping gravy from its yes, yes, yes. Who am I? He didn't know. Where am I? What did it matter? He began to walk, staggered, toward the verge of the jungle. He was light-headed with hunger. The sound of the surf boomed hollowly in his ears like the beat of a crazy blood. His mind was as empty as the mind of a newborn child. He was halfway to the edge of the deep green when it parted, and 3 men came out, then 4, and then there were half a dozen. They were brown, smooth-skinned folk. They stared at him. He stared back. Things began to come. The 6 men became 8. The 8 became a dozen. They all held spears. They began to raise them threateningly. The man with the beard stubble on his face looked at them. He was wearing jeans and old-sprung cowboy boots, nothing else. His upper body was as white as the belly of a carp, and dreadfully wasted. The spears came all the way up. Then one of the brown men, the leader, choked out one word over and over again, a word that sounded like, Yana. Yep, things are coming. Radio. His name, for one thing. He smiled. That smile was like a red sun breaking through a black cloud. It exposed bright white teeth and amazing blue eyes. He turned his lineless palms out to face them in a universal gesture of peace. Before the force of that grin, they were lost. The spears fell to the sand. One of them struck point down and hung there at an angle, quivering. Do you speak English? They only looked. Habla español? No, they don't. They didn't. They definitely did not habla fucking español. What did that mean? Where was he? And here's the picture I wanted to show you guys. Okay. It's like a crazy picture, man. Well, it would come in time. Rome wasn't built in a day, nor Akron, Ohio for that matter. And the place didn't matter. The place where you made your stand never mattered, only that you were there and still on your feet. Parlez-vous français? No answer. They stared at him fascinated. He tried them in German and then bellowed laughter at their stupid, sheepy faces. One of them began to sob helplessly like a child. They were simple folk, primitive, simple, unlettered, but I can use them. Yes, I can use them perfectly well. He advanced toward them, lineless palms turned outward. Him still smiling. He advanced toward them, lineless palms still turned outward, still smiling. His eyes sparkled with a warm and lunatic joy. My name is Russell Faraday, he said in a slow, clear voice. I have a mission. They stared at him, all eyes, all dismay, all fascination. I have come to help you. They began to drop to their knees and bow their heads before him, and as his dark shadow fell among them, his grin widened. I come to teach you how to be civilized. Nana, the chief said. The chief sobbed in joy and terror, and as he kissed Russell Faraday's feet, the dark man, hey, let me finish this, thank you. As he kissed Russell Faraday's feet, the dark man began to laugh. He laughed and laughed and laughed. Life was such a wheel that no man could stand upon it for long. It always, at the end, came around to the same place again. February 1975, December 1988. So, the dark man is not dead, but we are finished. And if I look, let's see how many days it took us to read, huh? Actually, and I'll do this. I got my book Maury, right? So I will get into my calendar. And I will write book Maury. Let's find the stand. Boop. Boop. And we shall edit. No, not that one. Doop. Delete. Status. I've read it all. Today is, nope. Change the day. Edit date. Over to December. Today is December 3rd. Okay. 5 stars. Edit page. Near. You know what? Let's see how many pages this book had because I didn't even look at that. There's a bookmark in here too. 1153. Edit page. 1153. Uh-huh. Okay, get out of there. Now, go back, calendar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. 25 days it took us to read this. That is actually not that bad. Not at all. And I am so, so glad. What? Can I ask you a couple of questions about sex just to learn? I don't have anyone else. Sorry, I can't help you. Why would you ask somebody? Nope, not going there. I don't know what that's all about, but yeah, you guys heard me read that. Somebody just wrote me and whispered me and asked me if they could ask me questions about sex. Absolutely not. Thank you very much. So I said, sorry, can't help you. I'm so mean. Anyway, we are done and we will be starting. Hey, excuse me. Excuse me. I'm talking to you. Stop barking. There's nobody there. Our next book is going to be The Tommyknockers. Now, tomorrow I do have an appointment, so I'll be awake. I'll be back home. But I'm not sure if I'm going to read tomorrow. But I think I'm going to because I would really like to read The Tommyknockers. And I'll tell you guys all about it and everything. And it's only got stop. It's only got 558 pages, so we should get through it in a week, maybe 2 weeks. Depends on how long the chapters are and everything. So anyway, I just wanted to say Tommyknockers. Whoop. Okay. If you guys have any other ideas that you'd rather that I read, please let me know. You can get a hold of me on my Twitter. I do believe that my let me see here. Let me see here. Okay, so yeah, Funny Readers Discord. There's the Discord, and I do have my Twitter, I have my YouTube, and my Kick, and my Patreon. So yeah, I have all these things. So don't be afraid to write me on them. I think what I'm going to do, with my Patreon is I'm going to maybe read on there. I'm going to see if I can make videos and stuff. I got to figure that part out. But if I can read on there, I think I'm going to take the more scarier books like It, or, maybe I'll read a Twilight series, or maybe I'll read the Aragon series or something. I'll find something else to do on there. I might do one-on-one sessions of talking to me, actually sitting down and having a chat with me or whatever if I can. So I'm just deciding what I want to do with my Patreon. So I think it'll be really, really nice. I just got to figure it all out. But tomorrow morning really depends on how I'm feeling. So, but I'd like to start The Tommyknockers. Like I said, if there's anything else you guys want to read, go to Twitter. Write me on Twitter. I'll check it every day. Just write me and say, hey, I have this book suggestion. Or, hey, can we read this series? Do you have this? And I can even read things from the library. So if there's something I don't have, I can always go to the library and see if they have it. It's possible to do. So if there's anything you guys want me to read, let me know. Don't be afraid to say hi. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm from whatever, whether it's, over here in the US or over in Europe or over in Asia, over in Russia, down in Australia, Africa, South America, wherever. You could be in Antarctica, and if you just want to tell me what you want me to read. If you have something you want me to read, tell me. If there's something you want me to do, tell me. If you just want me to sit here and talk sometime, tell me. Don't be afraid. So there's Twitter and there's, my YouTube, and you can make a comment on one of my videos. There's all kinds of things that you can do. So don't be afraid to do that. I know people are shy, and trust me, I am too. When it comes to being online, I am very, very shy. and reading was a big step for me. So it was I have papers falling on my desk. It's one of those things where I was really afraid to do it, and I really love it. I love to read. So don't be afraid. And I like people. I like to talk to people. So, don't think that you have to. We're going to read this part. I wonder what that is. Huh. Actually, we're going to stop here. All right. So that's going to be our next book, and this one's going back on my shelf. Yeah, I have this up here because this keeps people from seeing who's coming downstairs. By the time they get here, they can turn sideways and move. They don't like to be on cam, and it's fine with me. I was nervous too. So yeah, I'm gonna leave all this gibberish at the end because that way people that see it can let me know. I don't see any reason, like, there are things I won't talk about, like this one person that wrote, literally whispered me and wrote, "Can I ask you a couple of questions about sex just to learn? I don't have anyone else to ask." Guess not. That was at 8:30, and I don't know when he wrote it, but it seems to be the same time. I just wrote back, "Sorry, I can't help you." And I that's something I won't do. Like, I'm not going to talk about that stuff. And then there's this chat. We've been busy cooking up something extra special. Mountain Dew Rad is almost here. Stream with Mountain Dew 12/6 through 12/6 or 12/8 for your chance at greatness on Twitch. U.S. residents 18 plus, 19 plus for Alabama and Nevada. That's what it looks like. Maybe, not sure what NE is. Oh, Nebraska. Excuse me. It was Nebraska. Anyways, Alabama and Nebraska need to be 19, but I don't know what that is, and I'm not interested. Anyway, I try to be as open as I can with people. Yes, what can I do for you? What? Ugh. Nudge me, nudge me, nudge me, pet me. So they've made a mess of my living room. They really have. Like, you guys got your toys everywhere. You tore my blankets down. Y'all are crazy. Yes, I cleaned your ears. I had to clean your ears, and she was not happy. I have to give her medicine for her ear mites, and she's just not happy with me at all. So I made her get her ears cleaned, and she's mad at me now. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm just kind of babbling a little bit, you know. But yeah, if there's anything, if there's something you guys want me to do, like play a game that I might have on Steam or um something like that, let me know. The other thing is, if you have kids, little kids, check this out. I have grandkids. So I am going to put together a time where I'm going to sit for like an hour or two, depending on how long people can sit and watch. And I'm going to do a kids reading. I'm going to get my kids' books down and I'm going to read. And I'm going to read to my grandkids. And so if there's anybody that wants their kids to watch, we're talking Dr. Seuss, we're talking uh, Disney books. Others of them are Bad Kitty for the older kids that want to listen. Like, if you're, you got third and fourth graders, Good Kitty. There are Bad Kitty books. There's also Monster High books. There's also the book series of Lemony Snicket's Unfortunate Events. And there's also the book series of the Narnia series. It starts with the magician. So I think I'm going to read those. And what I'll do is I'll leave it a spot where it leaves them kind of hanging if I can, or be like, hey, that's all we're going to do today, and we'll continue reading next. And I've got to find a time because I read from 11 to 1 and then 7 to 9. So I've got to find something either morning, I think I'm going to do afternoon when kids are out of school. And I might change my reading times for here. Instead of doing 7, I might do 5 so that at like 8 o'clock, I can read an hour for the kids. And be like a bedtime read or whatever. So I'm thinking about that. So there's something for everybody to think about if, you have any suggestions for kids' books to read. So just let me know. This is going to be the Reader's Nook, and we're going to do more. And I might do longer videos. I might decide to, you know, do longer videos where I'm on here for a couple hours, more like 3, 4 hours. I'm not sure. It just all depends. And life does get crazy. So we'll see what happens. But there's what's upcoming. We're going to do a kids book series, kids books hour. We're going to continue with our scary horror books hours. If you want me to read the book series of like Aragon or Twilight or whatever, let me know. We'll read that shit. Know what I mean? Now, I may not save some of those videos, but for live sessions, I'm definitely going to read them. So I might write the author's oh God, what do they call it? Agent. The agent for the writer of Bad Kitty and the agent for C.S. Lewis, the agent for Lemony Snicket's, all those authors. I might write them the same thing I wrote Stephen King's agent and be like, hey, I'd like to read these. Would that be okay? I read them in sections. Sometimes I read the whole book and just see how it goes. But anyway, we'll see how we do. So tomorrow morning, we'll start the Tommy Knockers, I think. All right. I love y'all. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for following. Follow if you haven't, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.